centered the debate around human dignity, and that's something that I feel like has been absent.
It's taking some jobs for sure. I don't think all of them.
It's kind of like the biggest question on everyone's mind in the country right now.
Using AI as a tool to help humans, and rather than feeding AI your entire human consciousness on the same spectrum, I think there's a lot of bad with it as well.
It won't ruin art because good art is trying to address problems that people haven't even asked the question about yet.
Great power leads to great responsibility. Well, that's kind of longer than I thought we would talk for, but I think we just got on a roll.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Washed Up. I'm Colin. This is Abby. We're here in Washington, D.C. to comment on the weekly news so you don't have to listen to the legacy media that your grandparents do. And today it is June 2nd.
We are talking about a very topical topic today. I feel like one that we've been referencing for a little bit. All things AI, or at least all things AI in our experience, with Pope Leo's Encyclical that came out, as well as some leading stories in Florida.
Yeah, this story's been building for a long time, as everyone knows. I mean, the transition to kind of this era of AI has been coming, and we've been talking about it loosely here and there. But there's a couple inciting stories that I think just make it really top of mind right now, as Abby was alluding. In Florida, there's a lawsuit that the Attorney General brought against OpenAI for various different things, but primarily endangering children is what they're claiming. In that AI has caused issues with, there was a shooting at FSU last year that they're saying is tied to maybe conversations that the shooter might have had allegedly with a chatbot or something like that. They also cite a lot harms that come to children who use these chatbots as if they're talking to adults or professionals and that they're seeking help, and sometimes that leads to people will die by suicide, which is horrible.
Yeah, and this hasn't been, I don't think this is a new theme within AI mental health, like children getting access to chatbots. There's definitely been some stories in the past that I've read. I remember Ezra Klein did like a whole episode about generative AI and the fears that come with children's socialization, especially post-COVID, and like talking to chatbots as a form of socialization. I think he was talking with a childhood expert about it, so it's really disheartening to hear something like that happening right now.
Yeah, and I mean, we can even talk about a little bit. We were in college when the kind of mainstream ChatGPT launched, and that was kind of the first, I feel like, chatbot that really made like mainstream prominence. And I remember it was like November of 2022 when everyone was starting to kind of rave about like how this was going to change so much and that it was generative and it could write new content. And the concern was like plagiarism with schoolwork, at least for
Mhm.
us. And that was kind of how we were introduced to it, and it's evolved a lot since then. So how have you seen AI evolving, and where do you think it might be going next?
Loaded question.
So yeah.
Um,
It's kind of like the biggest question on everyone's mind in the country right now.
well, it's definitely evolved a lot since the first time I remember hearing about like ChatGPT and AI for the first time. I actually think I was studying abroad when all of that was happening, like for the very first time. And I think for one, it's moving at an exponential rate, like faster than any other like wave of technology. Some would say too fast. So I don't really know where it's going particularly or where it can stop growing. I feel like once people kind of open this box to something so vast, there's a lot of power in that, and there's a lot of good that can come from innovation and technology within medicine and research and efficiency, but on the same spectrum, I think there's a lot of bad with it as well. I was thinking about like while I was researching for this episode, I kept thinking like great power leads to great responsibility from like Spider-Man, and I definitely think that applies here and what kind of the thesis of what I believe, how I believe we should be treating AI stems from.
And last or two episodes ago, we were talking about China and how there's an arms race between the US and China to develop an
Hmm.
AI model, or especially with the large language models, that's going to, I guess, prove the most advantageous across all these different sectors and industries. And so there's a lot of competition within AI, and as you said, that's only accelerated the pace at which it's moving. And we compared it also in that episode to the myth of Prometheus, who brings technology to humans, in that case, fire, and how that speeds up their development and evolution in a lot of ways, but then it also brings about some negative side effects. The case anytime a new technology emerges, and then I also feel like you were alluding a little bit to Pandora's box, where once it's open, you can't put everything that results back into that box.
A little bit of flying too close to the sun as well. I
Some
think
Icarus in there.
when if we're going to open it up to all the Greek myths, I
Yeah.
definitely think that's one of them. Like in the race to innovation, in this competitive state that like specifically US and China are in, yeah, that's definitely one I think about.
And so it's starting to cut across all the different industries. Before, it was kind of people were interested to see is it going to cut jobs in like X industry or Y industry. But now I think people are starting to open up that it's going to have applications in for almost every industry, but to various degrees, it's going to maybe impact people's like job opportunities, for instance. But what you were saying in the medical field, it's really been taking off. They've been able to use it to kind of like look at, for instance, X-rays and identify cancers earlier. And I heard that one of the good cases that came out of AI was identifying pancreatic cancer in its early stages in a way where they can actually treat it before it, reaches like stage 4 or something.
Yeah, I think that when we're having this conversation about AI, there's like this specific differentiation we can make about using AI as a tool to help humans and rather than feeding AI your entire human consciousness to the point that like we're relying on it for everything. I think a lot of the conversations I've been having with our peers, you and I calling off camera, have talked a lot about AI as a tool and not as a cornerstone and foundation of like society.
Yeah, and that's a really important distinction that you just made, where recognizing that when you're speaking or conversing with a chatbot, you're interacting with kind of like, in some ways, the sum total of human consciousness that's been sort of like uploaded in a way, and they've, trained the chatbot to predict the next most likely word based off of this vast um, swath of human produced content. But so in a way, it feels like you're interacting with sort of the sum total of human consciousness sometimes, but also recognizing that it's not an actual entity or person with whom you can form that like connection with. And I think that's where it gets so confusing and weird for people. Not really me. I don't really have a hard time drawing a distinction, but I feel like with younger people especially,
When they're still forming as well.
and it feels like you're talking to another person to such a degree that maybe they take it as gospel or they believe that it carries the same weight as perhaps like a conversation with a loved one. And that is where it gets scary to me.
There's been stories I've heard like I think that was like a year ago, The Daily like did this interview with this woman or maybe about this woman who like fell in love with the chatbot and she was like purchasing like the max amount of subscription that you could do basically because after a certain amount of lines like AI forgets everything and she literally became heartbroken to the point that I think she had to like check herself into the hospital or something like that. I can't specifically remember the details, but there's that's just one variant of so many stories in which people are seeking human connection and community through AI and through chat. And I definitely like I can sit here and say that like I don't believe in that. Like I think that is wrong and it comes down to this like human and moral obligation we have to use something like this responsibly and not as something for human connection like as therapists, as your boyfriend or girlfriend, like as friends. Oh my gosh, I can't even emphasize enough, like especially for young children who are only now just like developing into fully fledged beings. What, you're not even like really mature until I don't even think a lot of 24-year-olds are mature, and we're 24 right now. So,
Do you think there's something a little bit twisted though about the way that these companies have designed the chatbot to almost approximate human contact? Like even naming it something like Anthropic has Claude, and I feel like
mhm.
even giving it like a human-esque name is kind of like I think Ezra Klein was talking about this too, like anthropomorphizing the chatbot in a way that might not be strictly necessary if you were just trying to design a product to use for like increasing productivity, for instance.
Yeah, I remember people kind of having the same thoughts about Siri as well when like when Siri was first introduced into Apple too. Like there was a lot of criticism around like why is it a woman's voice? Why are we naming her? Like why are we able to talk to this like next thing you know like we're gonna have a robot, like the same old like
Right.
argument when it comes to these new waves of technology. I almost think that a lack of community and human connection has only increased with each level of technology. So, like, looking at this, it's not really new, but navigating it under this specific scope is very new.
And just there's no question we're moving in a direction where sort of the integration of human and tech is just going to get closer and closer. Again, there's sort of a question that it raises of how integrated are we willing to go? If you are willing to treat these entities or these, pro things that are programmed to converse with you as if they're another person, but it's not, and that's confusing for some people. Where are the kind of guardrails and the boundaries there? And that is a question that's gonna become very relevant in a lot of ways, in probably legal ways, but also even with like bio technology ways. Like, are we willing to do stuff on the biological side where like human and machine is suddenly like now completely integrated? And it just raises like ethical questions like that. There aren't a lot of clear guidelines or prescriptions that everyone is in wide agreement on of like this will go right up to this line, but not over it. And I think that's what is so interesting about this time, but also kind of scary.
Yeah, and especially not knowing is a very scary thing. I think Pope Leo commenting on this is honestly like the perfect time too. Um, so yeah, he released an encyclical. It was like in English around 42,300 words. I thought it was really symbolic having presented it with the co-founder of Anthropic, Christopher Olah. Did you see
Hmm.
that? And like
It
I
was
was like,
interesting, yeah.
it's like this is a very interesting thing to do. But I couldn't tell interesting, bad, or good. I almost just feel like it was a neutral symbolic thing. Um, he was talking about little like different aspects of AI, government regulations on private companies that are developing AI, which I do think is necessary. And I also like agree with you, like there needs to be guardrails, but I don't know how about it to go because the most realistic take on AI is that it's here. I don't think it's very productive to sit around and be like, how do we ban this everywhere? How do we get rid of it? I think the productive question to ask is how do we use this for good? How do we use this as a tool? How do we maintain humanity and use this in the best way possible for each of our lives?
Yeah, sort of like there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube once it's out. And again, it totally feels like that's the stage we're at. Although my pushback to that would be that on the marketing side, these companies have a lot of money invested in making you think that it's completely inevitable. And so I do resist when I see like PR or marketing that's saying like, literally I've just seen like billboards like it's here or like the new age has arrived or like stuff like that. And I'm like, first of all, like you don't have to tell me in such overt terms. Like we know that we're all paying attention. We all see there's a shift happening and it gets a little bit manipulative. If everyone is convinced that this is inevitable, then we're more willing to go along with it in certain ways. When I think taking some time to consider the real implications is also important.
Hmm. And I do think that it's a little suspicious when people claim that something can change overnight, but I really do want to emphasize like my thoughts on AI in terms of, yeah, using it as a tool. I think like even in Pope Leo's encyclical, he kind of talked about like the retraining of jobs and also I think he said something about oh yeah, education to like help think students think critically about technology. I almost interpret that as like we have talked a lot about how AI in schools for young children can damage critical thinking. And I do think that in schools there should be guardrails on like what to be used because children aren't the same as adults. I think that we shouldn't like free for all, like let kids use AI, especially like on schoolwork and things like that, where I think the point of a good school system is to teach children how to think critically once they're a fully fledged adult. Like you might not want to take all the levels of math, but it's teaching you a way to think critically through other problems, if it's something that you're not good at. Like I personally haven't taken a math class since I was 18, but do I regret learning all of that? Do I remember all of it? No, but I do know how to problem solve.
Definitely. And so you're talking about the encyclical. I want to go back to that just a little bit. What I liked about it is it sort of centered the debate around human dignity. And that's something that I feel like has been absent from a lot of the conversation, especially on the side of these like tech bros who are driving these different AI companies and models in development. And so I was glad that someone on like the global stage was taking the time to kind of reframe the entire debate away from just pure like we're going to maximize our productivity and like the output's going to be through the roof and the economy is going to be great. Like, okay, fine. But also like we're people, we're human beings, we have needs. And unfortunately, like there's things about being a human that are inconvenient sometimes. And you can't just ignore those or use machines to necessarily like solve every single problem. We also have emotions. We're very complicated. And for the instance of job loss that could arise out of AI, we can't just go full steam ahead, consequences be damned, no matter how many people you have to lay off to like integrate AI into the workforce. No, like we actually have to pause and take a moment and consider the human impact of what that could bring about. And I think it's great that Pope Leo was taking the time to do that. I didn't read the whole encyclical because it was very
Yeah, I
long.
didn't read the whole thing either. I read the highlights.
But it harkened back to the Industrial Revolution. This is what I've heard. There was the last Pope Leo wrote an encyclical similarly around the time of the Industrial Revolution, talking about how the rise and advent of technology was displacing people from jobs and their humanity, and calling for recentering of human dignity in all that.
Yeah, I do like the perspective that Pope Leo put on it in the human dignity aspect. Like a lot of people aren't talking about, I mean, there are stories about how it's impacting like young children, how it's impacting like this school shooting, this shooting story that we referenced at the top of the episode, and things like people's ruining relationships with themselves and each other because they're forming connection with this bot who's basically just regurgitating what they want to hear, essentially. I do think that there's an important like distinction to make between like having qualms with AI in general and qualms with AI regulation. Like I definitely think do think at this point, like you kind of have to accept that it's here. So like how are we going to go about it and like regulating it in a way that it's going to not destroy our younger generations? Like teaching students and people how to use technology to better help them like with their day-to-day tasks and not get rid of them in their fields altogether. Like there's so many amazing stories about like what AI can do now. Like they can like essentially in like the tech world, basically, you can do all these things that would otherwise take so much longer to do. But like, is somebody like me able to do that? No, because I don't even know the questions to ask. Like, that's still something you need to go to school for. And I think that's something that people kind of forget as well when making that like distinction about it's taking all the jobs because it's taking some jobs for sure. I don't think all of them. That's why I'm a big advocate for like learning it before it takes it all or before you lose to it, if that makes sense. Like if you're already here and you're adapting, then you kind of have to do it.
I agree with everything that you just said, and for both of us, I think it puts us in an interesting position because I think both of us do value, again, the human dignity side of things, but we're also like against mostly regulation. And so it's like an interesting kind of catch-22 where like if this emergent technology is calling into question certain aspects of human dignity in society and how we think about those things, but also we're both pro free market and innovation and adapting to the times and not holding progress back. yeah, there's a real tension there in terms of how do you actually address this question from a logistical or practical standpoint. But I like everything that you just said about instead of kind of strangling the baby in its crib, like you find a way to coexist with the emergent technology, to apply it in meaningful ways, while also keeping the human dignity at the forefront of the conversation around it. And just moving extremely intentionally, deliberately, as opposed to just like no holds barred, no rules at all. Everyone is like kill or be killed essentially in the world of competition and business, which that is how that world operates. But having voices like the Pope who kind of exist outside of that world, who are able to have influence in that conversation, is key, I think.
I'm kind of curious what you've seen about how people are reacting to the Pope's encyclical. I feel like the Pope talking about AI needing regulations and push back against like not having human connection. Like I think a lot of maybe the more techie people might be a little bit upset about that. Like, have you seen pushback of the Pope, like
I
in the
think
Catholic Church, like people who are in the Catholic Church, I guess?
Well, I think he wrote it at a very good time because there is a lot of angst around AI right now. And we've seen with all these like commencement speeches at graduations that are happening where people will get up and say like, it's such an exciting time to be entering the workforce with the rise of AI. And then all the students in the audience who are graduating will like boo the commencement speakers.
The rise of artificial intelligence is the next industrial revolution. Oh, whoa. What happened? Okay, I struck a chord.
It's also like such the wrong crowd. I've been
Yeah,
seeing it like, and it's usually for humanities college, like College of Humanities and
right.
Arts. And I just like, I'm like, choose your moments, choose your crowd. Like, if you said that to like the School of Engineering, I'm sure that they would get applause because they are using AI for efficiency and to better help understand like complex data sets and things like that we don't even understand that we wouldn't even know how to insert into AI to use our degree in.
But so yeah, so the Pope like making a statement when he did, I think it was very timely. And not just with that, but then also, for instance, with the Iran war, people have been calling into question, well, to what extent is AI helping the US fight that war?
Hmm.
And for instance, when there was a Tomahawk missile that hit that girls' school in Iran, and we kind of deduced, not we, but like people who talk about foreign policy deduced that this was a strategic error on the US's part. There was an open question of, well, were we just using bad intelligence that this mistake would have happened in the war anyway, or was it something like having to do with AI and the way that we conduct warfare now versus in the past? And another thing that's happening is the Pentagon had a deal with Anthropic to essentially use their products in war. And
And Pope Leo called against that as well, talking about how we as humans remain responsible for all decisions and weapons, which I think is also another interesting tension, especially as an American Pope.
Oh, de definitely. And he knows what I think he knows what he's saying without having to say the full thing. Because I think when you're in the US, you kind of implicitly understand how the military-industrial complex is working together to drive wars abroad. And so the Anthropic had been working with the Pentagon, but then they had to end that deal because Anthropic wasn't willing to capitulate to certain demands that the Pentagon had, allegedly.
Hmm.
And so the Pentagon and the government labeled Anthropic as a supply chain risk, and they ended their contract with them. And then Anthropic ended up suing the Pentagon and the government. So it's changing everything like warfare and raising these really important questions. And so that's why I think like it was a well-timed time for Pope Leo to make a statement about it.
Yeah, it's honestly really strategic of Pope Leo and for him, I think back to kind of when Pope Leo was chosen and there were a lot of different people who were excited for very different reasons. I think that they kind of thought that Pope Leo would align with a lot of, I guess, what America right now aligns with in terms of leadership. So it's a very strategic and interesting time for him to say something, and analyzing that within itself has been fun too.
Apparently, JD Vance also spoke at the West Point graduation and had made similar statements about how like we need to be cautious and deliberate about how we're integrating AI into war. And I thought, well, JD Vance is a Catholic, so to answer your question of how are Catholics responding to Leo's encyclical, I wouldn't be shocked if Vance was at least somewhat informed by the Pope's statement.
Mm.
But so yeah, I want us to bring in some other perspectives on this because we both have talked to so many people in our own lives and spheres about what they think about AI. So how do you think like Gen Z feels about the rise of AI?
I almost think Gen Z is very split. Maybe it's because I interact with a lot of different people who have different jobs. And that's like a good way to, I think, go about it too, because you don't really like know how much AI is used in other jobs and like how useful it can be, especially in like kind of the more data-y, like STEM research, world engineering type,
Couldn't be us.
which is not us, obviously, versus like the creatives, right? Like I actually was just talking about this with a friend and I was like, I wonder what kind of articles would be written in our newsroom at the time or what I would think. Like I could just see like an opinion article out being like, I'm anti-AI. This is why. And I imagined myself in this like hypothetical scenario, like challenging the anti-AI part of them and being like, okay, but what is there for good? And then kind of seeing our whole entire newsroom groaning at that. Like, because like truly, yeah, like it does make more sense to me that people who have a background in humanities in like the more traditionally creative subjects that they are like a little bit or not very jazzed about this.
Well, it's funny, we did write a couple of articles back in like 2023 and 4 about AI, and one of them, most of them were like news articles about different developments within AI. And for in particular, there was a lawsuit by a bunch of authors who were suing one of the companies for like essentially eating their manuscripts and feeding it into the models to train up their models without having the copyrights to the work that they were giving to train the model.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, there was like the Authors Guild, I think, was suing one of the AI companies, and we did write a news article about that. And then we were writing about like how plagiarism was potentially, we would interview different professors and be like, how do you plan to address the situation if someone turns in something that's clearly AI generated, or are you going to run all of your assignments through an AI scanner? And you know, the professors were still kind of figuring those things out back at that time. There wasn't like a blanket policy at that point, and I still don't know that there is one. So that maybe answers your question a little bit about what would we have written about AI back in our college newsroom. But I also wanted to pull on that string a little bit of the creatives and how they're responding to AI because it's currently rocking the publishing industry quite a bit. There was a work that was published titled Shy Girl by
Hmm.
Mia Ballard, and it was first published in the UK. It was published by Hachette, and this book, people were commenting online saying like this sounds like it was completely AI written, and eventually it came out that the author denied that she had used AI to write it, but she's like, well, maybe somewhere in the editing process, one of the editors who I outsourced it to when I published it independently might have used AI. So she was denying it, but she wasn't completely closing off the possibility of AI having influenced the work. And so Hachette had to discontinue the publication in the UK and they canceled the publication in the US. And so the publishing world was really rocked by this because it's like, holy crap, like our job is to kind of screen for these types of things. And if this one was an example of a story that might have slipped through the cracks, what does that say about our model moving forward, where like the agents are sort of the gatekeepers of what ends up getting published? Or traditionally that's been the case, but is that whole model now out the window with the ability to just generate entire works almost from scratch, seemingly?
It kind of reminds me a little bit of when we were talking about AI initially when it was like first rising in terms of the creative space. And I remember I think all of us were I think afraid is too strong of a word, but definitely wary. There were stories about like in journalism, like an entire newsroom being AI. Do you remember it was like a sports, I can't remember which. when
Right.
it is right now. And then we also like we would talk about sometimes being like, oh, this writer, it seems like this writer is using AI or something like that. And there's definitely an easy way to recognize it back then. And by back then, I mean literally only 2 years ago. I'm talking as if this is so long ago, but that's how fast it's moving. Like everything you put in to chat is sucking it up and becoming like part of it, so it can better reflect like different modes of like a writer, right? Like
Yep.
you can kind of, if you wanted to, plug something into chat and be like, okay, now write it as if John Green wrote it. And I hate to say it, it's like kind of accurate. Like not that I've tried that specific one, but I feel like it's it's definitely a really interesting tension within the more creative side of the world. Like I know a lot of like musicians and artists are publicly shaming AI and like AI slop. I can't say that word, sorry. Um, and talking about how much it's harming this human connection aspect because like the point of art is to connect through a different medium.
With feeling too, I'll
Yeah.
add, and AI does not have that capability, unfortunately.
And something interesting that I also saw was how recently the mainstream iTunes charts have been, all the top songs have been AI generated. And it's because like on like TikTok and Instagram Reels, like these songs that people are using the app background are AI. And that's why it's being like streamed so much because people are using it so often. Like I don't think people are sitting here being like, oh, this artist is my favorite and it's like an AI artist. I genuinely just think that it's like of the time right now in terms of trends. And I think that's really scary. Like I'm like, wow, the number one spot of a song right now is an AI generated track. And like I didn't know that until I think I was listening. I don't know who I was listening to, but they had like mentioned that and I was like, is that true?
There's so much to pull on there, but I just wanted to say I think there's a huge difference between like generative AI versus AI that you can use to like assess large data sets.
Right.
And to me, there's a great case to make for the data set variety where you're having it do these sort of mundane, tedious tasks that would take human beings like hours and hours of kind of mindless drudgery. Like I say, yeah, automate all that immediately. Great. Wonderful. That's gonna like speed up things so much. But on the generative side, again, to your point, like humans, in my view, and in the Catholic Church's view also, are meant to create. And so if you're going to outsource your creative potential to a machine and have it do it for you, and then package it up as if it's the same thing when it completely bypasses, again, our ability to emote and our dignity, and you're going to try to commodify that and sell it to me, I'm gonna be really pissed off about that because it's not the same thing. And so yeah, I'm not a fan of the rise of generative AI used in these creative fields. I recognize also you can't stop it. All that you can do is try to outcompete it.
Hmm.
So I mean, yeah, sometimes I feel a little bit like I'm like Dwight in that episode of The Office where he's racing the computer to make sales because I think it won't ruin art because good art is trying to address problems that people haven't even asked question about yet. So it's identifying themes and stories and narratives that are relevant, but we haven't yet put our fingers on. So to me, like generative AI can't do that because it can only pull from an existing like set of
Yeah.
content material. And so it's not really original and not really interesting from my perspective. But yeah, I wanted to mention too, there's a really good article in the Washington Post by Megan McArdle, who is my favorite columnist there for what it's worth. And she talked about how there's a lot of books being written completely entirely with AI that are being published, like ebooks especially, because there's, again, not really those gatekeepers in terms of publishing an ebook. And a lot of it, it sounds ridiculous because it's almost nonsensical and it's trying to approximate human language, but coming up short. And she said it's interesting because some people actually love that and they think that it's like the greatest thing ever and find that storytelling really interesting and unique and dynamic because it's different from what they're used to. But she compared it to fast food in the sense that it's like very cheap to produce, but it doesn't actually have like the quality and the depth of it that you
The
would want.
nutrients.
Yeah, like you consume food to get nutrition and to thrive, And fast food is sort of the cheapest, worst version of that, the calories without the nutrients. And so to me, AI generated content is exactly that. It's the calories without the nutrients.
Yeah, I like that description, the distinction that you made there because, like I said, like we were saying earlier in the episode about kind of like that AI as a tool aspect and how, like, there are definitely tasks that a person shouldn't have to take 3 hours doing, 4 hours doing if an AI system can do it much faster and save time for you to do something that actually, like I don't want to say matters, but actually like you feel purpose and want to apply yourself in that way. One thing that I feel like I kind of want to wrap back to near the end of our episode is that I actually don't think that critical thinking can ever truly disappear.
So in preparation for this episode, I talked to someone who's a substitute in Maryland at like high schools and middle schools, and I talked to someone who was a TA in higher ed at NYU, and both of them kind of had the same conclusion, which, along the story short, basically the kids' brains are cooked. And it's not good, you guys. Like, I actually feel privileged in the sense that we got mostly through college before AI and chatbots were a real thing because we actually had to work to like learn and to build sort of the synapses in our brain, the pathways, so that we sort of like you said, we learned how to learn. And if you don't develop that capacity through the actual hard work of it, there's no way to bypass or shortcut that. And my concern is if you're not learning in a more traditional way, not to say there's no technology or no AI allowed in learning, but if you're not like reading things and hearing things and writing things, pen and paper or typing even, you're not forming the connections within your own brain. There's someone really needs to study this. The neurology of AI dependence is what I would call
I'm
it.
sure that there's going to be studies on it in the future. By future, maybe that is only 2 years from now as well.
I mean, someone needs to get on this immediately. I would if I had the time. But so there's this, especially in psychology, there's this principle called Hebb's law, which says what fires together wires together. And the way that we develop skills is we practice the same thing in repetition over and over again, and that strengthens the neural pathways by literally the synapses grow together and become interwoven essentially. It creates a network. And the richer the network, the more interconnected all of the different synapses in your brain, the more they're able to just very quickly like pull things out of the top of your head essentially because the wiring exists within your brain to just fire off quickly. But if you have a very disconnected brain with not a lot of synaptic connections, then things are going to take you a lot longer to process. And so my concern is when you're using AI, you're not building those interconnections that are required to actually be a critical thinker or
Yeah,
even be
which is
intelligent.
something, yeah, which is something that again, like you learn so much when you're young. Like, I think there's an argument to be made that sometimes people or students even will be like, well, why do I have to know this if ChatGPT can do it for me or if I can learn this through this and they'll do all the work. But like, that's really not the point of school, I think, for young people is to learn how to learn different ways to learn how to interact with people your age. Like, it's not just about learning to become a mathematician or a scientist and like the kind of like the traditional route. Like it's a lot about approaching the world from different perspectives as well, which comes from every single topic. I think there's art laced in every and creativity laced within every single topic. I think that's the way, yeah, I think that's the only way I can explain it. Like I don't think critical thinking can go anywhere.
And that's exactly why on this show, you and I have also been huge proponents of like liberal arts education because it very much takes that approach of you develop a person's capacity across all these different domains, and maybe you're not going to specialize in like English and literature, but it benefits you to have a part of your brain that has like essentially adapted and formed those connections around English and literature that's also now connected to like let's say you're in a technical field and now you have both sides kind of developed, and it makes you a more well-rounded person, which actually makes you more impervious to sudden societal shifts that might put you out of a job, or for instance. So we think that liberal arts education is great. I still think like classical education is absolutely the way to go. And this might be toward the end of my spiel here. We've also talked about AI psychosis, and I wanted to just bring that back up of what do you think is going on there? Have you seen it yourself where people are actually like their brain is fully cooked on AI?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'd like to say that I see it more in younger people, or not, I'd like to, but like I generally think like what you were saying about how like we were kind of lucky to like avoid that aspect. There's definitely kids out there who are very reliant on AI, and I'm sure there's many adults out there too now. And I don't think that we should be using AI as like I said, something to consult every time your life goes wrong or every time you need to send an email or solve something. I think that you can do those things on your own and use AI for actual good and productive things that you could do in your day-to-day life.
Absolutely. And to also like make it known and not I want to be clear, like I'm not being hypocritical here. I honest to God think I would never use it for correspondence because I think that's kind of insulting to the person who you're in communication with. If you can't bother to actually write out your own message to that person, I think that's insulting and defeats the point of communication. So there's certain like use cases that I would absolutely never use AI, and the only real benefit that I've seen, or the best argument that I've seen made for it is that you should use it for, again, those menial tasks that are going to free up time for you to do more of the creative, generative, communicative side of whatever profession you may have. But going back to AI psychosis, I definitely have seen people who become so reliant on it. This happens very quickly, by the way. It can happen in the span of a couple of months, where a person goes from very high functioning and independently thinking. And then literally within the span of months, I've seen people kind of collapse in on themselves because they're so dependent. And it is sort of an addiction in a way. I don't know how else to say it, where they have outsourced their critical thinking almost entirely to a chatbot or something and are having it write all of their correspondence. And I've just it's terrifying because I'm honestly at a loss for words of what to even say about it. I've seen some very high functioning people go off real deep ends, and it's hard to say it's entirely because of AI, but I do know that these were some of the earliest adopters of AI who really were trying to integrate it in every aspect of their life.
And sometimes, like, if you look at like correspondence and it's just like chatbots talking to chatbots, or you see it like on the internet or something like that, it's called like dead internet theory of like just all these things that are just like generative AI interacting together.
Like
Yeah.
bots on the internet. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a real strategic challenge for us as communicators through the internet too. Like when we post stuff, I think it's always a little bit hard to differentiate like what is actually the human side of stuff, which is who our audience is, and that's what we care about, and that's who we're trying to reach, versus like bots on the internet or yeah, like you said, the quality of social media has gone
So down.
so
That's a
downhill.
whole other episode though too. Like social media since it became commodified. Boo. That's all I'll say about that because I could talk about that for another 2 hours.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's pretty much wrapping it up for me. I think hitting on dead internet was that's totally a big issue that I also care about a lot. Something we've talked about in the past actually on Washed Up too. But perhaps we can delve in deeper another time and also delve in deeper another time about the energy side of this, which we talked about actually 2 episodes ago. And I want to talk about eventually some of these CEOs who are really driving these companies because I think some of them are very interesting and also concerning individuals.
Agreed. Those people are always concerning individual. Well, I just think people have their own agendas a lot of the time. Um, I did want to say, also shout out to the people that I talk to who are more like STEM, engineering, computer science based, who gave me some of their perspective as well of how they've been using AI as a tool in their fields.
Definitely, because we appreciate having that perspective too. I think if I wasn't in conversation with people who were actually seeing the benefits of it, it would make me more pessimistic and more kind of doomer in a way of just like shut it all down, because I take that creative approach of I think human creativity and dignity should be at the forefront of almost everything that we do. And when I see that being undercut, it upsets me in a lot of ways that I think the rest of the country is also being upset about. But staying open-minded to the benefits in the economic terms, but also on those fields that have benefits for all of society, such as medicine and science.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's all for us this week.
Washed
Washed up about
about.